Well, it is finally happening. We are seeing more and more proof that the DLC is right around the corner. All the Bandai Namco YouTube channels updated their Elden Ring playlist previous week, meaning there's a private video there waiting, and we also saw a DLC pack update on SteamDB. Now, it can be another big update and some cosmetic pack like we had in the past, but let's just assume we will get Shadow of the Erdtree on Elden Ring's 2nd year anniversary. Okay, I will talk about the things I want to see in Shadow of the Erdtree in different categories you are seeing on your screen right now, and I hope to read your expectations for the DLC down in the comment section, so let's get started. Before we get into the gameplay aspect of the DLC, let's talk about the setting. Shadow of the Erdtree will almost certainly take place around Miquella unless they leave him for the final DLC. If you don't know his lore, I highly suggest checking a lore video about him, though I will quickly summarize him. Miquella is the twin brother of Malenia. He is the son of Radagon and Marika. Somehow that happened, so just picture it. He is loved by everyone and he has a special gift to unite everybody. So basically the golden child, everybody loves him and he is talented in pretty much everything. During the events prior to the game, while Malenia was busy nuking Caelid, Mohg sneaks into Erdtree and kidnaps Miquella, so his stepbrother kidnaps him to make him his spouse. Just good old royal family thingy. And the cocoon you see in Mohg's boss area actually contains Miquella's body. Mohg plans to turn his stepbrother Miquella into a new god. Now, presentation here is especially interesting. I am sure many of you know the anime series Berserk. Since Dark Souls 1 from So Far Games had so many Berserk references, Miquella seems to be a direct reference to one of the major characters, Griffith. Once again, I won't get into too much detail, but in the anime he is tortured for a good while because he bangs King's daughter, who King himself wanted to bang. Then once he is free, he betrays his companions because he lost everything, his body is not functional anymore. Then he reborns as a big bad god, quite the annoying character because of everything he does. He creates a new kingdom once he becomes the god, just like Mohg wanting to create a new dynasty by turning Miquella into a god. Miquella's transformation shares so many similarities, and when he is reborn, most likely he will also be this bad guy stripped from his former personality. Now, in-game, if you play around with the camera, you can see the character model of Miquella, but I can assure you he will not look like this. This is just a reused asset of dying Morgoth after his battle at the Erdtree, so it is highly unlikely that they would just reuse Morgoth's character model for fully evolved Miquella, especially the version of Morgoth that is dying on the ground. With everything we know about Miquella's lore and the references to Berserk, it is obvious that he will be reborn as a powerful god, and Shadow of the Erdtree will most likely introduce a dark fantasy-like setting we haven't properly seen in the base Elden Ring itself. You see, the world of Elden Ring is quite vibrant and charming. It would be refreshing to see a world design similar to the grim dark world of Dark Souls. Personally, what I want to see in terms of the map design is having a full-scale dark forest like Dark Souls 3 had. If you paid attention to Cathedral of the Deep and Farron Keep from Dark Souls, we don't really have this type of dark fantasy forest anywhere in Elden Ring, and assuming Shadow of the Erdtree will focus on dark horror aspect of world building, it would be a huge miss to not include a full-scale cursed forest. I would love to see horror aspects and darker theme in the new upcoming map, but I would also love to hear what you guys would prefer in the upcoming map design. From So Far, DLCs shine with amazing boss designs. In the past we got absolute masterpiece boss fights like Artorias, Gale, Meteor, Ivory King and many more. My expectations for boss fights is huge, but I also have my doubts. Elden Ring's approach for bosses was a bit concerning. We got many fun fights, but there were also so many underwhelming or frustrating encounters. For example, Mohg is a great character, challenging fight with an amazing setting, and soundtrack is just perfect. But I can't bring myself to like this encounter at all. Delayed attacks are fine when they are used occasionally, but delaying almost every single attack is more annoying than challenging. Same goes for input reading bosses. I have beaten this game at level 1 without any armor. Videos still on my channel if you want to check out, so this is not an instance of me complaining because I can't get past a boss or anything, but it just feels wrong that we went from bosses like Gale and Ishin, who are difficult yet fair, to bosses that input read and frame skip during animations to make it difficult to react. It just doesn't feel fair and it doesn't feel like a proper difficulty. Generally, I like Remembrance bosses in Elden Ring, but I hope to see more bosses with the same principles of Gale and Ishin's design. Overall, there are 3 types of boss fights I want to see in Shadow of the Erdtree. First is a decent dragon fight. Compared to Midir, all the dragons in Elden Ring are underwhelming. We have 2 major dragon fights in this game, Placidus X and Fortis X, and I find them both disappointing. Placidus X is far from his prime form, and we as the player fight him in his wounded, crippled state. He doesn't have a variety to his moveset, and he just sits there like the old grandpa dragon he is. In his fight, he never feels like a real dragon. He's too chill and lazy. He even feels more domestic than Seed the Scaleless. Then we have Fortis X. He was under the command of Placidus X, but lore-wise he's the strongest dragon in all Elden Ring. Even stronger than Placidus X, but his design is way too similar to all the other dragons you encounter in Leyndell, so he doesn't really have much going on regarding his design, and his fight is too easy despite him being the strongest dragon. Unlike Placidus X, he is much more aggressive and his fight is packed with more action, but his low health pool and extreme weakness to damage inflicted to his head makes him so forgettable. So lore-wise we have amazing dragons, but they lack on the gameplay part. They are not as ferocious as Dark Souls dragons and they don't offer a difficulty that would complement their lore. Next is duo bosses. Elden Ring has terrible duo bosses. There isn't a single fun duo fight in the entire game. Godskin duo and Gargoyle duo they just don't work. It is just 2 solo enemies put in the same room. They don't work together, they are not programmed to fight as a team. It is just 2 irrelevant enemies in matching pajamas bullying you together without a game plan. It is even worse with lesser duo bosses like Crucible duo. In the earlier builds of Elden Ring, they were way too aggressive and they would just attack you at the same time constantly, but now they are nerfed too hard and one of them stays in the back until you kill the first one, which completely ruins the duo fight setting. From Software is capable of making amazing duo fights. We have seen its examples many times before, like Demon Prince for example is the greatest duo fight From Software ever made, and then we have Ornstein and Smaug, Bell Gargoyle's second phase of Sister Freda. When they try, they make well-structured fun duo fights, so I definitely want to see a proper duo fight in the upcoming DLCs because base game is really missing one. And lastly, as I mentioned earlier, I just want to see a proper human boss without tricky, frustrating mechanics and input reads. Elden Ring has implemented many quality of life changes that removed the painful parts of previous games and gave a spotlight to actual fun parts. Stakes of America is one of them. In the previous games you would have to run back to the boss and on the way you could take unnecessary damage and get frustrated by a long painful run all the way back to the same boss that killed you earlier. Battle of Chaos and Smelter Demon runbacks are some examples to this, but it is no longer an issue with Stakes of America, so From Software is willing to remove the annoying parts and let you play the actual game with their new game design, but there's still more to be desired. Elden Ring is missing a couple features I would love to see. Biggest one is having a way to replay the bosses without starting a new game cycle. We had this feature in previous 2 From Software games. Dark Souls 2 had Bonfire aesthetic. You could push an entire area to a new game plus cycle. You could increase the difficulty up to 8 times and you could fight the bosses as many times as you want as long as you had Bonfire aesthetics. This feature is desperately needed in Elden Ring because of the open world setting. Right now I have multiple characters, but I am building a separate character for PvE only. I do all the side quests, I explore every single corner, I kill every single boss, but if I want to increase the difficulty and refight the bosses, I have to move to a new game cycle, which then will lead to me losing all the progress I made on the map. In the previous games this was not an issue thanks to semi-open world linear setting, but Elden Ring would benefit so much from a bonfire aesthetic mechanic because I just want to refight the bosses without losing all the progress I made in the entire map. Sekiro also had a similar version with Gauntlets of Strength where you could pick a boss, instantly travel there and fight him as many times as you want, or if you wanted something more difficult you could go for the challenges and you could fight stronger versions of the bosses one after another until you reach the top. It is just an amazing feature that allows you to fight bosses as many times as you want, and I just don't see a reason why we don't have this. I believe even if they plan to implement these systems to the game, they would most likely go for bonfire aesthetics, since Gauntlets of Strength would decrease the overall playtime spent on the game significantly, but this is one feature we desperately need in the game. Originally, From Software would release PvP arenas with their first DLC, but now that we already have arenas, there's hope that we may get boss rush mode instead with the first DLC. By the way, it already exists as a mode which you can download and try, and I sometimes use it for my videos to quickly include a clip of the boss fight without needing to replay the entire game. But modding Souls games is always painful, and there's always a chance to get banned because of it. So respawning a boss with the mod and then killing it and then rolling back the save file so you can go back to the online mode is just too much work. Also, it doesn't work perfectly. I wanted to include footage of 46, but the mode is not respawning him for some reason. It only respawns the gang fight before 46, and I didn't want to play the entire game just to include a 2-minute footage of a boss, so there's that. It already exists as a mod, and I see no reason not to implement it in the actual game. Another change I would love to see is the number of people that can connect to a world during PvP. In Dark Souls 3 you can have 6 players in an invasion, while in Elden Ring max number is 4. If you try PvP in both games, you probably know why 6-player cap is much more balanced and fair for both invaders and the host. Also, one quick thing, this is more of a meme and not a real issue, but why is resurrecting torrent comes with the option no by default? It is just evil. Please change it. Variety of sorceries in Elden Ring is amazing. There are so many different types of sorceries with so many unique effects and animations. Incantations, on the other hand, are quite underwhelming. In Elden Ring, I almost exclusively play melee, but I like having the option to make use of spells every now and then. The issue is, incantations in Elden Ring don't really feel complete. Flame type incantations are quite powerful and fun, but it is a different story with other types. Even though lightning is my favorite, and it can be extremely powerful with correct builds, there's lightning strike which will miss the enemy 90% of the time. There's frozen lightning spear, it is supposed to hit big targets multiple times, but hitboxes are kinda bugged and half the time it will miss most of its damage ticks. And all the red lightning spells, despite being extremely powerful, they all do the same thing with a slightly different animation, and I'm not even talking about how slow they are. It gets even worse with holy incantations. They are really powerful and fun in some areas, but due to the setting where you are constantly fighting against demigods, pretty much every important enemy is resistant to holy damage, making it unreliable and weak in late game. In the lore, Miquella creates most of the holy incantations, and considering the setting is him being reborn as a new god, we may get new types of incantations that are similar to Golden Order spells, but rather than being holy, they would most likely be the opposite of the holy spells, or they could even be cursed flame versions of them. However, even though it is unlikely, I want to see some new lightning spells, especially frozen lightning. Blue lightning is my favorite, but we only have one impractical spell and 2 weapons. Frozen lightning looks too good to only have 2 weapons and a single spell. I really want to see more variety to that. As I said though, we will most likely get some sort of cursed version of Golden Order incantations, but I still want to see more variety to lightning. The ones we have are either extremely slow or they are straight up not working properly. But if you are playing mainly as a caster, I want to hear what kind of spells you would want to see. Elden Ring is the biggest Souls game out there. There are more weapons, more spells, more armor, and more bosses than any of the previous games, and naturally it is the hardest game to balance. And I am not the biggest fan of the endgame balance in Elden Ring. Towards the end, everything becomes a glass cannon. Bosses have at least one attack that can take 90% of your health. You can definitely play around this and have proper defense, but then the other issue is bosses are taking way too much damage. So it is just 2 glass cannons fighting each other, and some fights are really chaotic and underwhelming because of this. Dark Souls 3 has a better approach for bosses in this scenario in my opinion. For example, look at Gale. Gale has a massive health pool, he doesn't take much damage from your attacks, but he also doesn't do a lot of damage in return, and you can constantly break his posture with set number of attacks, so you have a proper window to take his health down faster if you want to. This results in a long cinematic fight, but no boss fight in Elden Ring feels this way. You can easily nuke bosses. I have beaten all from From Software games at level 1, and Elden Ring was actually the easiest game to complete at level 1. Fights are so short and chaotic compared to the earlier From Software games, and I just want to see some more cinematic, long and difficult fights. Another balance issue that actually bothers me more is PvP. I love and also hate Elden Ring's PvP. If you also spend a lot of time doing PvP in Souls games, you will probably understand this. If you tried Elden Ring's PvP in low level, like anything below rune level 60, invasions and PvP itself is so much fun. Fights are long and enjoyable due to everybody doing low damage, but when you go for meta PvP instead, it is an absolute chaos. Anything about level 125 is so boring. Ashes of War are way overtuned, everybody takes too much damage, and meta PvP in Elden Ring comes down to who will insta-kill the other player first. My channel was essentially a Souls PvP channel, and I still have some of the PvP videos set private in my channel sitting there collecting dust, so I'm not saying this because I tried PvP and died instantly or something. I have thousands of hours in Souls PvP, and by experience I can tell that Souls PvP is fun when everybody is doing acceptable damage. Killing someone instantly and then moving on to the next invasion is not really fun. In the previous games, if you wanted to nuke someone, you would have to backstab or parry, but in Elden Ring you will just spam a certain Ash of War and that will be enough. That is why you can still see people saying Dark Souls 2 had the best PvP and Dark Souls 3 had the best invasions. In my opinion, we all need to do much less damage in late game PvP, similar to low level invasions. I am also aware that this would create the problem of gang squads having a massive advantage over solo invaders, but Dark Souls 3 had 6-player cap that fixed this issue, so I don't know why in Elden Ring player cap is 4. Anyways, these are some things I want to see with the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. Don't forget to share your opinion. What features do you want to see in the upcoming DLCs? I read and engage with every comment, so I can't wait to hear your opinions. Also, if you have made it this far, consider liking and subscribing. It helps a lot. But this is it for today. I will see you on the next one. Bye.